everyone, I'm Gemma Starr and welcome to another episode of Heart Warriors. Heart Warriors is a series I've been inspired and guided to do thanks to my energetic connection with Kata Judah. Kata Judah is the sacred masculine site in Central Australia, very close to Uluru, our sacred feminine site. What I'm here to do is to give a platform to our men and ask them to articulate their journey into the heart, their highs, their lows, their experience, their rock bottom moment. How did they spiral up to become the men they are today? And we'll hear about their tools, practices, their insights, their wisdom. What can they now share with other men walking this path? And of course, us women who are walking right there beside them. Today's guest is a man called John Flaherty, and John is a respected leader in the field of alcohol and drug addiction. And he's a former psychotherapist and a former Catholic priest. So really excited to hear John's story and how he came into this line of work. And of course, all his tools, wisdom that he can now share with others that are in addiction, and hopefully we'll get some tips on how to start spiraling up. So enjoy. Hello, John Flaherty. Welcome to Heart Warriors.
Yeah, and very, 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 very pleased to be connected with yourself, Gemma, and indeed all of your viewers, all of your listeners. Thank you very much.
That's lovely. Whereabout in the world are you?
I'm in the UK. I'm in the northeast of England, in a place called York. York being the original York before ever there was a New York in the US of A.
That's beautiful. Awesome. Well, I always like to find out a little bit about the guest by asking them, who would you be if you were to drop all your labels? Who's the inside man?
Mm-hmm. All right. If I were to drop all of my labels, wow. Well, I'd love to think that I had dropped all of my labels some time ago because I had, like we all do, I had amassed, quite a number of them. Like most people do, we tend to think of ourselves as the job that we may have as we grow up, and prior to that, the peers that we might have and what our interests may be. And I would have had many. I enjoyed sports, I enjoyed music. And then in terms of the role, the job that I soon kind of went into, well, mine was a rather unusual one in the sense that it was a lifetime kind of job, a lifetime role, a lifetime label, in that I signed up to become a Catholic priest, and fortunately also managed to find my way out of that so that it didn't stay as a lifetime label. But we might go into that as we go along a little bit, Gemma. But part of what I'm about today, rather than what I do today, is it's just that. It's actually encouraging and assisting to the best of my ability when people have really got to a place of feeling stuck about whatever in life. And that can be a great number of reasons, where they've lost, or maybe never have had, a clear sense of purpose or identity or direction in their life. A starting place would be to do it just as you've asked me, to assist a person to identify, first of all, how they've identified themselves, what label or labels have either been put on their own self or borrowed from someplace else, which is even more usual, and then become their own without their even thinking about it, and then continuing to try struggling to fit that label. A label is what? It's a label. It's a fantasy created by the mind, isn't it? Really, we can make up any form of label we wish and carry it off in whichever manner we think is so. But it's a label, just like a label is on a jar of jam. It might say JAM, but you open it up and it could be cranberry sauce or whatever else that looks like jam. It's a made-up thing, isn't it? A label. And we are made-up beings. And when we unmake ourselves up, we become our being again. And then that's what gets exciting. That's a freedom, as far as I can see, letting go of labels. So I to answer your question very quickly, what labels have I amassed? Probably quite a number. I love to think that I have let them all drop away, but guess what? There's always one that can sneak in without noticing. And I'm quickly, hopefully, onto it and realizing, don't need to go there, don't need to go there, don't need to go there. And that's a lovely freeing thing in itself. Also, I find.
Yeah. Okay, that's wonderful. Right. Let's get into your childhood. So what would you say
Okay.
was the biggest challenge that little John went through?
Oh, wow. Little John. Little John in childhood. Well, quickly give you an idea of what my childhood consisted of. Mother and father, very loving mother and father, happy enough to be connected with mother and father. I had an elder sister, 5 years older than me, and a younger brother, 4 years after me. We grew up in a very working class, what in England we would call a council house, a very ordinary home on quite a rough estate, right? Certainly we were not a wealthy family by any means. My father was a shipwright, a shipbuilder, a carpenter by trade. My mother had a variety of different jobs, but generally speaking, she was an at-home mum. We had that ease of connection all the time. It's hard to think of a time when my mother was not present as we were all growing up. And little John, well, what sense did little John make of life? I think probably the first label I maybe discovered about myself was that I was frightened. I was a very frightened little being, I think. And I think that fear for myself, Gemma, arose not within the family. I felt quite safe within the family. But we're always different as a family, because even living on that working class estate where we were in those homes, everything about us looked different. As I recall it, or if I look back at photographs from those days, we dressed differently. We would dress quite nicely. My father made sure we had a nice garden that looked tidy, whereas every other garden looked dreadful, really, really had been neglectful. We were different. We were definitely different as a family. And for me, as I was growing up, I developed a fear, and it was largely in my schooling. Um, for me, school and I really just did not go together. We just didn't. I was frightened. I was so fearful of getting things wrong that I rarely got anything right. It was oppressive schooling for me. I was frightened of the teachers. I was frightened of the methods. I couldn't make much sense of the various subjects that were put in front of me. And yet, even as I'm speaking to you now, Gemma, and recalling what you've just asked me there, I do believe that I had a knowing, and a knowing of another kind, to be able to see through the subject being taught, to see through the facade of the fearful teacher that kept me so kind of limited within myself. I knew that I had a very creative right brain, and I knew how to go about things with my left brain logically and systematically. But the right brain core was always far more attractive to me. Though, of course, in school, you're not really allowed to do that. You have to go through the hoops, so to speak. And that I did find, I really found hard. I was frightened. I think in quick answer to your question, little John grew up not within the family, but certainly outside of that nice safe domain. I found the world to be quite a daunting place, courtesy of education system primarily.
And how did you cope with that fear?
I put on a good facade. I was maybe good at picking up labels, invented ones again, going back to your original thing. I formed an identity about myself. I was able to do it anyway. I seemed to be able to bypass a lot of it. I made sure that even if I wasn't great at soccer, I played soccer, right? Even if I didn't think I would be able to pick up a musical instrument and do anything with it, I did, and became very proficient. I loved to play the guitar, became a very good guitarist as the later years went on. But it was always almost like approving myself, because that early start was about how inadequate I seemed to be presenting. I can so much remember teachers perhaps keeping me in a place of smallness when a question might be asked. And for me, and it was much later in my years that I discovered why this was happening, how it was going on. But for me, I would be accused of daydreaming, okay? I would look out the window, okay, while the question was being asked. And what I was really doing was just formulating a picture image of what the questioner was posing to me. But the questioner was seeing that as John not listening, or John not behaving, and John certainly not paying attention. But really what I was doing is just literally, or sometimes, and I'll often do it, maybe even in our conversation today, Gemma, you might see me close my eyes. I do it all of the time. It's as if I need to put down the shutters in order to see through and out the other end of whatever's being posed in front of me, bypassing the fear probably initially, and then being able to come to a clarity at the end of it. And I suppose I do that to this day. It's just that now I have the confidence to see that as not being a fault in me, but in actual fact as, for some other people, and certainly for myself, a gift, a real gift, an ability to see through. And there's a lot in this world, and particularly in these last few years, which have been bizarre and very threatening, to say the least, for most, and very confusing. It's been essential to be able to see through the lie that's constantly put in front of us, and that we're convinced is, this is how life is, this is how we do it, and you'll either succeed or you won't. If you succeed, there's a reward, and if you don't, well, good luck to you, but there'll probably be a punishment at the end of it. Okay. And that's basically how I have picked my way through life as I've gone, trying to unravel all the way what's true and what really isn't.
Yeah, it seems like your whole childhood now prepared you for these times.
Yeah, I'm sorry, even just in that conversation I'm having with you right now, even now I'm getting clarity on the fact that, do you know what? That is probably so. Yeah, very likely so.
Well, and then you became a Catholic priest. So what was the
Yeah, I'm
lead up?
laughing.
What was the lead up to that?
Yeah, that was, well, you know, I just going back to that little family origin. Yeah, we were a kind of nice, a nice homely family. I think there were always good basic human core values that we lived by. You know, there was definitely an element of that. And because my mother and father just passed on, as their mother and father did to them, and their mother and father did to them, a Catholic upbringing that became my own. So it was Christian, and it was Catholic was the whole religious practice that I just naturally entered into. And, you know, for me, and possibly going along with what we're already saying and talking about, in my experience, for me, the whole symbolism, the ritual of church, the smell of the incense, the lighted candles, the aura of whatever was presented there, it was quite captivating for John. It really was. Maybe it was my little place of escape or of creative, imaginative exploration, whatever. But it appealed. And of course, this message of talking about Jesus and all things good and all things, you know, to aspire to, you know, what was there for John to see, you know, problematic about that? In fact, rather quite attractive. So at an early age, and, you know, I don't hesitate to add, definitely with the encouragement, very much so, from mother and father, mother more particularly so, you know, that how wonderful that as a family we were doing that. And if John was showing an interest in that as a line of his possible future, it was very much encouraged. And I was happy enough to go along with it. I didn't question it, put it that way. And so at the age of 11, when I think about it now, I shudder actually, but at the age of 11, I embarked on this business of training to be a Catholic priest. I mean, it's really quite ridiculous. In fact, now I do shudder. It's abhorrent to me. And how my parents actually didn't see that, you know, still kind of, you know, amazes me. But it was all part of a conditioning, Gemma, and we've all been conditioned and programmed. And I certainly see that now as, a big part in what took me into the priesthood. But away I went. I went to seminary, which meant being away from home, away from that nice little happy dwelling that I've just described to you, and into the great unknown. And, I was away for weeks at a time, got home a little bit at the Christmas time, Easter time, summertime, could see parents, but it was just when they could get there. It was quite a distance to travel. They didn't have a car, so there were visiting times. And after Christmas holidays, I'd be incredibly homesick, desperate to get back home. And my father actually came to the rescue on that so beautifully. And I'll always be grateful for him for that, because unlike my mother, my father would say, John, if you don't like it, you can always come home, right? And you know what? Those beautiful words of reassurance enabled me to get through night times of homesickness. And in the morning time, just even knowing that, I was able to go through the next day and the day after and the day after, just knowing there's the permission slip, there's the escape route. But in actual fact, of course, daytimes are always easier than night times when you're in a state about yourself. And I was able to enjoy most of the life in the seminary. There was a lot of sport. It really opened up a huge amount of possibilities that other schooling wouldn't have. I was able to canoe. I was able to go not skiing. I was able to go hiking. I was able to go walking. I was able to all kinds of different things that wouldn't have been available to me otherwise, right? And I loved that, and I thrived on that. And I was given, generally speaking, quite a good education without the fear. There was a confidence that came back to me there. There was more permission, and it had a purpose, because it was, in my mind, leading to the next stage, the next stage, the next stage. Even though I was only just 11 years old, I could see something of that. There was a safety net in that to an extent. And so it went. And that's really how it all started. I went through all the normal schooling after that, while still in the seminary, did what we call here in England GCSE, O-level, A-level. Didn't do too well, still wasn't that great on knowing how to pass exams. I discovered that much later on. I panicked. I went into fight, flight, freeze, and never knew quite how to do that. I used to think I was putting fabulous answers down on the examination paper. And then I realized much later on, if you just kept it really simple, it would have passed. It would have been fine. But, John was off on a different tangent altogether. And of course, I struggled with exams. But, again, I got by. And it was only much later, much later, when I was able to take academics far differently into my stride and go on to do a degree, master's degree, any number of other things added to the list after that, and quite enjoyed it without the fear. So that seminary life very much did for me. That's the plus side. After that, it became a whole way of life. And by 25 years old, I was ready to enter the priesthood. So I was well and truly conditioned, well and truly programmed, and away I went, but still into the great unknown, because it was. You don't get a choice of where you're going to go, what you're going to do. A bishop actually appoints you to a place of living, people to care for and deal with. And so off I went. And over the time, I was in two very large parishes, two very big communities of people. One, quite a working class background. The other one, a very different one, a very kind of middle class type place, with lots of different people in the community who would have had far more kind of high ranking types of profession, lawyers and doctors and all kinds of people. And but you know what? I didn't have a fear about any of that. I was comfortable in what I knew, what I wanted to project. And people loved me. People loved young Father John. There's nobody. They loved this lovely guy who gave his all. And I did. I gave my all. And I loved what I was doing. And I love teaching the Christ message. And I love being at the beck and call of people. But really over time, Gemma, just to cut a long story as short as possible, it began to really take its toll. Really took its toll. because I think it just started to dawn on me that I had a very glossy image of what I could do in that role. But the church authorities, a bit like the school authorities, had a very different expectation of me. And I felt it was closing me down something terrible. In effect, I later could see it was being what we might call a nervous breakdown, right? It was a real breakdown of my confidence, of my heart, of my ease, or whatever, because I was being asked constantly to confine all the things that everybody was loving about Father John and loving about what I was loving about me, and to be kept in such tiny little package, what we call dogma and teaching and doctrine. And I came across that great thing of the American comedian George Carlin, who's always very amusing and has a great wit. And one of his great quotes was, they gave you a coloring book at school and some crayons, and they tell you to be creative, says George Carlin, but don't go outside the lines, right? It's a hilarious thing, and there's such truth in it. And I suppose really, as I reflect, again, as I'm doing in this conversation, going back to childhood and even now to the age of 25, that's exactly what I was doing. But, for John, I had to keep going outside the lines, right, with the crayons, right? I had to. It was my great need to do that. And it was probably what people were loving. And the Christ message, I do believe to this day, is very much about going outside the lines, really. But we don't go there as long as an authority says, this is how it's done in this family. This is how it's done in this school. This is how it's done in this church. And for John, something had to go. Something had to go. Either it was going to be me all my life in the Catholic Church. And fortunately, I had the wherewithal and the need, in actual fact, to remove myself from the confines of what I thought was going to be the perfect label and the perfect expression of me in the Catholic Church. In actual fact, now, to this day, and more I discover about what that whole setup is about, it scares the life out of me. And I'm so relieved to not be part of it at all. And what I'm doing, as I'm doing in my work to this day, and people are coming from all different walks of life and carrying their own versions of that same limitation, that same stuckness, that same fear, whether it's in the form of addiction or the guilt that they're carrying, or the shamefulness that stems from the guilt that they're carrying, or the depression or the repression or whatever. Of course, I can understand perfectly well what they're all about, because I can see that they've been trying to use the crayons and be as creative as possible in their life, but not to go outside the lines. And that's what really, as far as I can see, is destroying everything about the heart, which of course is what your lovely series is all about. The heart doesn't get a look in when you're trying to live by that form of stifling, burdensome authority in order just to let your being be. I can't do that anymore, and I can't bear to see other people attempting to do that and pull it off, because it's so destructive, Jim.
This is fascinating, John, and I really want to explore this a bit more, if I may. The first thing that comes
to mind, yeah,
because I did see on your the little bio I got from your website that you help men overcome guilt and shame. Now, I know from the Hawkins scale of frequency that guilt and shame carry the lowest emotional frequency. Now, I have also related this to religion, and maybe more so the Catholic Church with confession. Definitely. And they keep you, I've always felt that they keep you, their aim is to keep you in this energy of guilt and shame. Can you expand on that, please? What are your thoughts?
I can well expand on it, because it's something inevitably, as I went through, so out of the Catholic priest, just to kind of give a little lead into that, if I may, from the Catholic priesthood, hadn't a clue what to do with my life. You know, if you go into 11 and you come out to 25 and then you spend another 11 years in the Catholic priesthood, what on earth are you qualified to do, right? Well, certainly I hadn't a clue what else John was going to become, right? But I inevitably did. I found my way of progressing through lots of different job types, experiences, call them what you will. The first was to go into the world of HIV and AIDS, right? A very scary time when people were terrified, made to feel terrified about it in those early days, all those awful advertisements that would come up on television, scaring the life out of people. And yet, actually, you know, I talked earlier to you about my initial fear of getting things wrong and therefore rarely got things right in my schooling. But you know what? By this stage, it's as if I didn't have a fear in the world about anything anymore. And I went into that role of HIV/AIDS, and I met the most beautiful people struggling with their ailments of one kind or another. And I just didn't have the fear of being in their close proximity at all, quite the opposite. What I saw is what I see nowadays in many other people, not carrying anything of HIV or AIDS or anything of that type, but people who've been really hurt in their lives, right? Who felt a lot of pain and felt very on their own. And inevitably, the men and the women in that role of HIV/AIDS were those primarily who were carrying a lot of guilt anyway about their lives, a lot of shame, and very low self-worth. And if there was going to be anything to be had, their immune system was so low that, of course, they would be susceptible to even the fear of something like HIV/AIDS, right? Now, I've learned a lot about HIV/AIDS as the years have gone on, but in that experience, that's what I could see. People primarily so much in fear and so much in guilt about whatever had gone on in their life prior to that, that they were going to be prime candidates, if you wish, to be susceptible to whatever next threat could be possibly put on their doorstep, right? I learned a huge amount in that place because coming off the street, the homeless people, prostitutes, people who were street workers coming, and they similarly with all of their addictions, all of their dependencies, just trying to survive. They taught me a huge amount about life because I was willing to go there. And they related to me with ease because to this day, I've learned that as long as I don't go to head and fear, and speak from heart to heart and soul to soul with another being, do you know what? We never have a problem in the world. Because all a person dearly wants in this life is affirmation and validation that they're okay, that they're beautiful beings who've been really hurt in their lives somewhere along the line. And they've had to stay within the lines with their crayon in order just to try to make some kind of impression on the world. And we do this in very creative ways. And sometimes we do it in very destructive ways without even knowing it, to ourselves primarily. So that entered into the whole world of addiction. And there again, we see another layer of people in the very same place. Guilt and shame really being core and central to it, really low self-worth, lack of any kind of objective or bigger picture, beautiful hearts. I've never yet worked with a person in whatever state of addiction without me feeling that they were in actual fact almost ahead of the pack in their creativity and their vision and their ability to see so much about life than perhaps the ordinary everyday person who doesn't feel as though they have a problem in the world, right? But they can't. And there lies their challenge because they've tried to keep their magnitude tiny. And there is their addictive pattern of behavior already in the making, right? Trying to keep their natural magnitude in small. to go back to your original question, which is really running right through all of that in my experience, is this thing we call guilt, and then the resulting thing of shame. People sometimes home in on shame as though it's the everything. I don't see it like that. I see that it's almost virtually impossible to have shame without guilt. We can actually have guilt without necessarily having so much shame, but guilt is always the backdrop to shame or embarrassment or anything else, right? And guilt for me, really crystal clear now, so much so that I have written the book, Guilt Unplugged, Waking Up from the Lie We Live, because I can see that is nothing of God, nothing of this source, nothing to do with how to live our life freely, easily, from the heart, from the soul, from our essence, but very much a man-created idea of a God authority. And guilt is the most killing of all things, because what it really does, it keeps us in a falsehood that we could have said or not said, done or not done enough, thought something or not thought it through enough, to have actually kept us so cut off, feeling so unworthy, so separate from the source of life that's otherwise just sourcing us beautifully without any agenda, just being lifed as we are. But the thought that we could be literally cut off from that all-loving, all-providing, all-giving source of life is too much for any human being to bear. And that comes in many different forms. It comes through all the authorities that we're so used to. It comes from our schooling, which we've gone through a little bit, definitely. It comes through health services that tell us if you do this, you'll be healthy. If you don't do this, you definitely won't. Therefore, if you take this remedy, you will be fine. If you don't, then, oh God, where do you go with that? It's fierce. There's nothing to do with health. The courts are packed full of that, right? The judge slams down the gravel. Okay, guilty or not guilty? They don't want to know the ins and outs. It's a yes or a no, right? Are you guilty or are you not guilty? This is what you're accused of. I'm not going to give you a 90-minute slot with heart warriors to explain yourself. It's in the here and in the now. What's the answer? And guilty, right? Bang, off you go, right? Okay, punishment, whatever. I've visited people over the years many times, Gemma, incarcerated, sometimes life sentences for something that they would have done years ago out of fear, out of guilt, out of confusion, being hurt, going into a confusion and a panic about life and about their own self, and have acted accordingly from the level of consciousness that they were at that time. That's all. Guilt itself makes no difference. Holding guilt makes no change in a person's life. So no amount of amassing more guilt will actually improve the situation that resulted many years ago. Therefore, to realize, if every one of us could simply realize, there was a time in my life when, from the level of consciousness I thought I had available to me at that time, I said or I didn't say, I acted or I didn't act, I thought or I didn't think, and therefore the result was whatever it was. And it made me feel so cut off from the very life source that's sourcing me, even in this moment, as it's sourcing you, Gemmas, as it's sourcing me, that which I still can call God, but I know is not the God of fear and not the God of separateness, but actually just simply lifing us. But to have that sense that we could have failed to such the extent that we feel this shame that then follows, the embarrassment that follows, that nothing can remedy that. is absolutely, to my mind, unacceptable, totally unacceptable. How do we release the person burdened by such a lie? Well, my method, if you like, my approach, which I've had to do hugely for myself before I would even begin to think I had the arrogance or the anything to then put to another being, would be from the place of guilt. We can, with the right handling and in the right perspective, move to a place of remorse. That's a huge lot different to the stuckness of guilt. With remorse, there's more fluidity about it than there would be with just guilt rooted. Remorse, what does it do? It gives the individual an opportunity to realize, there was a time when, but would I now, with the awareness, with the knowledge, with the experience, I act in exactly the same way? No, probably not. Right, there's the clue. Therefore, would you? Are you? You're still being lifed. Is there a God out there holding it against you? No, you're still being lifed. You have a life to live. Even if you're incarcerated for the rest of your years, that's your punishment. That's hard enough to bear. But guess what? Life's still lifing you. Your heart's still beating. Your eyelids are still flickering. Your pulse is still pulsating. You're being lifed. There is no out there waiting to get you. Come into that state of being, and remorse enables you to realize, yeah, I'm still here. Life's not holding anything against me. From the place of remorse, Gemma, we can then more easily move to the place of regret. Regret's even easier than the place of remorse. But when I was writing my book, Guilt Unplugged, Waking Up from the Lie We Live, when I started to look into the research and looked at the word regret, I realized it has an original German foundation, which is better expressed as regret. Wow, when I saw that, I was like, magic, that's beautiful. That's exactly what regret is. You're regretting a truth about yourself in the here and now that wasn't even available to you in times past, and now it is. You regret the truth of the lie. The freedom immediately is there before you. How beautiful is that? And from the place of regret, we're far more easily to go back to our place of connection again, which is the biggest thing we fear, being disconnected from. And it's all brought about by the need for authorities to keep us in a controlled environment, a stifled, much easier to direct and to harness and to infiltrate and to harm and to keep us dwarfed into comparison to what our truth of our heart, soul, and essence is really all about. I can't bear to see that happen in any person at any time, child, teenager, adult, very elderly person. In the priesthood, I was often at the deathbed of somebody ready to go off to their next experience of this life and still carrying guilt. And I assure you, even then, at that point in time, they can be adorning. I've seen it many times. I have actually been one of these people that can say, I have seen the soul leave the body. And what a relief that must be to be relieved of the heavy body, mind, controlled, dwarfed lie that we might have spent 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years living. What's it all about? We can't do that. We can't do that.
No. This is
I
fascinating.
can't do that. I can't let anybody do that.
This is fascinating, John, and I really want to get as much as I can out of your experience. But just to clarify now, what is your definition of God? Are you religious? How did that journey unfold?
Right. Well, do you know what? I'm not religious. No, that went by the by. It had to, because my experience was killing me. Okay, there we are. Good enough reason. Off it went. Right. And I don't have anything detrimental to say unnecessarily about a person's pleasure, enjoyment, ease, comfort, or connection that they feel with God through their religious practice. Why would it? That would be arrogant again, ignorant also on my part, because another person's experience is another person's experience. Mine has led me to all the things I've been saying so far. A freedom for me, huge. God for me, do you know, I don't have a difficulty now in still using the word God, because I have my own very, very much wider appreciation and understanding of what may be meant and understood by that little three-lettered word, G-O-D. But I'm perfectly happy with terms like the source of life that's sourcing us, because indeed it is. And for me, even more easy, I see it as life. There's a big difference between life and the world. I know we use the two words synonymously as though they're one and the same. You know, we talk about I'm just in the world and we're just doing things in life. But for me, there's a big difference. The way of the world is not an easy place to be in. It's not an easy place at all. I sometimes wonder, and many people have said to me, do you not think in actual fact that we're in hell? Right? That this world is actually in hell? And you know, it's a very good point. Yeah, because we're often held in such smallness about ourselves. Life, on the other hand, well, it's just lifing us. It's just lifing me here in York, in England, and you in Australia, and the many other people who are maybe following, you know, this conversation I'm having with you, wherever they are. Guess what? And whatever state of mind they're in, whatever panic, anxiety, smallness of thought, or grandiosity they might be in at this moment, life's just lifing you. Life is just lifing you. We're not having to do a single thing about it. Life, in other words, Gemma, as far as I can see, and I can use that word God in its place, it doesn't have an agenda. The world has a very specific agenda, right? Because it's all made up. It's a fantasy created by the many minds that have decided to make it the way it is. And therefore, anything made is there to be unmade, right? The world is in the process, I believe, of being hugely unmade. And the lie is very, very, very much at last being seen for what it is. And I would love to think that in my time of life, I'm going to experience this beautiful emerging change, which I ideally want for the little ones in my life. Now, because of that, I might say, in many ways, wasted experience of years spent in the priesthood, knowing that in actual fact it was going to lead to some many, many other things else. I, with a beautiful partner I have, Anne Louise, who I love to bits, and she loves me in every way, and we have such connectivity, and I have learned so much from her because she softened my heart, right? She softened my heart, and that I am immensely grateful for. But because we were so much later in our years before we did come together, and we married, and we did all we married in the religious setting, oddly enough, you know, but we married there, right? And it was fine, and we've been very happy with our connection. But we didn't have our own children, and we would have loved our own children, but we've been gifted, because life does this, in giving us a beautiful niece who has two beautiful children, who I write about in those two books, Addiction Unplugged, Guilt Unplugged. Because there, in their lovely childhood, Aidan, who's now 13, when I wrote the book, he was only about 3 or 4. Aidan taught me so much about being a child, right? Aidan would, Aidan had no concept of, which I did, of what's going to happen tomorrow or what happened yesterday. For Aidan at that age, everything just happened now. Can it not just happen now? Right? Let's happen. Just why is it not? I could say, oh, we'll go to the beach tomorrow. Or wouldn't it be nice if we went, skating at the weekend? That meant nothing to a 3-year-old. I had to learn that. That meant nothing to a 3-year-old. Can we not just do it now? That's precious. That is so precious, right? So Aidan taught me a huge amount of how to live in the now. If Aidan couldn't actually do something, as a 3-year-old apparently seemed like they can't do in the moment, guess what he would just do? Let's pretend then instead, right? Okay, let's pretend. What a beautiful thing that is to hear from a 3-year-old. Let's pretend. The adult forgets to pretend and create and go outside the lines, going back to George Carlin's wonderful little quote about the crayons and the coloring book. Do you know what? We're being so much hijacked by stupidity. Now, you asked me a question preceding that was, and therefore do I still see God as a God? Well, I see God as life. And for me, a beautiful understanding, simple as it is probably the best one yet that I would probably tend to use with others when necessary. Does a fish know there's any such thing as water? Right? Okay. Does a fish? Well, in all likelihood, I would say probably not. Would you, Gemma? Right? But does it know the absence of it? Forgot the little fish out of its little fishing pond, its little bowl. Well, poor little thing is flapping, and it certainly knows it needs to go back to where it just. Right. Are we aware similarly of a God? Well, I'm always aware that God is. I have no doubt about that. Life is. But I now also know whenever I, for whatever forgetfulness, being pulled into the preferred lie about myself or whatever, which the world can do easily, all the time, a thought passing through the head. If I go on the back of a thought, it can take me anywhere, like any thought can. And you don't know where it's going to go to, but it's usually it's just a thought, right? It's a good idea to not go on the back of every thought we have, but we've got to learn how to do that differently from a place of awareness we can. But does a fish know there's any such thing of water? No, but it does know the absence of it. I know the absence of when I'm out of alignment with my heart, out of alignment with my choices, out of alignment with my creativity, out of alignment with life. And soon, and it doesn't take me long, to then quickly want to come back to the water, just like the fish does again, right? That's my only and best short experience of me and how I interpret that God. No agenda, no demands, no requirements, definitely no thought of reward or punishment written into anything at all. Just lifing, just breathing. There you go, off you go. If only the world would let you. And that's what we have to really constantly make sure we're on the alert about. Nothing in the world can prevent that. Nothing in the world can prevent you and your being from being. But it's very convincing, and it's very domineering, and it's very controlling in all those different ways: schooling, health, courts, finance, religions, big time. That can certainly give us the impression that we've still got to merit it first. Somehow or other got to do something out of the ordinary in order just to be the very beautiful beings we already are, that can just pretend, and that everything is just happening in the now. Just like Aidan taught me, and now he has a lovely younger sister, Molly Anna, who's even reminding me again of what it's like to be 6 years old, right? And then it gets even more exciting, But now at the age that I am, I have to keep remembering. And really, that's what I'm always, all the time, wanting to teach other people, men and women. I know we talk about the divine feminine, the divine masculine, but we can even get caught up too much in that. And it can be a duality of its own making, and it can throw us off. But what really is absent, I would say, from the male, most of all, is their presence. Their presence. With that same ease that I'm talking to you about today, that somehow or other has been hijacked, and they have gone missing from a truth about their own wonderful presence that absolutely must come back into the fray. And we've got to show people how to do that, demonstrate to people, but most of all, it's just a remembering, because every man on this planet has simply forgotten to remember what they did know when they were 3 years old.
So good, John. We might come back to a bit of that, but I've got to make sure I dedicate a good section to addiction, seeing
Okay.
you are a leader in this field. So shall we start at the beginning, as in reasons people are drawn in more than others into addiction? What are your thoughts around that?
Yeah. Okay. Well, as you can tell, I'm never very good at giving short answers, but here we go, because we've always got to put it into a different context and a content to that which the world more conveniently puts to us, right? So, addiction. Well, what is it? First of all, I don't believe there's such a thing. Isn't that an amazing statement? And I used to say that many, many times to the many, many people when I was working in addiction rehab centers, right? And they would fall off the chair.
Right?
What? You tell me? No, there is no such thing as an addiction. You're not in addiction. What's that? Addiction, first of all, it ends in ION, Sean. Like most words that end with TION, it's a very static word, right? And I've not come across one person believing themselves to be in addiction that's exactly the same as another. So it's very specific to the individual. So we're really, more strictly speaking, we're addictioning. We're addicting, but it's very much a moving thing. It's an action, right? And it's an action that's been learned, like all actions have been learned. And it's been learned because of the lie that we've been caught up in, the smallness, if you like, about how we get through life. So my experience is this: when looking at a very beautiful soul who's had maybe years of torturous experience in their addictioning and haven't known what it is that they need to do in order to come out of it, or in order to be accepted again by their families or their loved ones who they have believed to have done such awful things to, right? Even though, and often is the case, their very loved ones and their families have all played a part in that person's addictioning, whether they realize it, accept it or not, because it's never just about the individual. But Gemma, we all come into this world. We come in, as far as I can see, from the source that's sourcing us, where everything is provided for in roughly the 9 months of the womb, where we're at that place of connectivity, where it must just feel absolutely golden. Arguably, we're as near to God as we could possibly be at that point in time, until we pop out from our mother's womb, right? And then all hell breaks loose, right? Because we take one look at our mother or one look at our father and think, well, I'll give it a go. But, and they call it my father, and I've heard God talking about as my father, but, it doesn't resemble the one I've just kind of come back from, right? So in the womb there, where I was totally at one with that beautiful all-providing source and didn't seem to have a problem in the world. And now I have in the world. Okay, all kinds of things. My mother is telling me, you look just like your uncle so-and-so. Well, I looked like my uncle so-and-so, and I didn't care for the look of him at all, so that doesn't do me too much good, right? And somebody will say, oh, you're going to be just like this and just like that, and it all sounds horrendous, right? And this is how we do things in our family, and as long as you do things like this in our family, you'll be fine. And you soon find that as you're doing the things in your family, I'd love to live across the road in that family, because they seem to be having a much nicer time than I am. And so it goes. And I know I'm making light of it, but you know what? We're created into a being that's just feeling constantly up against life, up against it, right? And in some cases, of course, I am making light of that, but that's even in a very lovely, caring, happy, what we might call normal, regular family introduction to life. But where there has been the opposite of that, where there's a trauma a violation, a really keeping small, keeping dwarfed this otherwise natural, beautiful development of soul, essence, heart, being that we all are, of course it leads to difficulties further along the way, right? Because right from the outside, we've already got this impoverished understanding of what we may or may not get from life. And that, to my mind, is always, always the hurt, the pain that essentially, even if it's not fully cognized and recognized by the individual, that's the origin of thinking that how else do I actually find a something extra outside there of myself somewhere to replenish or take the edge off or make something feel that bit more manageable than otherwise the pain of my trying to make sense of the no sense of this world make work. Right? So it's, you know, it's not rocket science for me to understand why a person would become alcoholic, because it's so readily available and so much promoted in our life to be, that's how you have a good time, okay? And substance use, and the people that use various substances, they talk about partying, right? Well, my idea of partying is definitely not their idea of partying, because their idea of partying is so self-destruct in so many ways, right? But it's partying. Why? Because it seems like the release, the relief that brings a lesser pain to the fore in their otherwise experience of this life and this world. So my take on addiction, bit like it is on guilt and shame, of which there are always elements in the addictioning that's going on, is to assist the person to move from the place of addiction, again, the place of stuckness, to instead a place of preference. Ah, you've no idea, Gemma. Introduction of that word to the person that's maybe gone through umpteens 12-step meetings and all kinds of treatment centers and counselors galore. I've got to add here, and there are many, I'm sure, somewhere out there must be some good addiction counselors, but in my experience, they're absolutely downright bullies most of the time, who just like really can keep people very dwarfed in their addiction because they're so busy counseling their addiction. How would they know what not to do if they weren't acting as an addiction counselor, if they didn't have some addiction person to counsel? You know, so it can be counterproductive in many ways, right? Do we ever let the person and otherwise be free of their addictioning, right? I believe we must, because we owe it to the person who's learning to go from their place of addiction. Oh, you mean I can have a place of preference? What's a place of preference? It sounds a lot better than addiction. Preference is, do you know there's so much more to you than you've so far experienced about yourself? Do you know that there's a thing called becoming more aware about things that you were never taught at school? It was never demonstrated to you in your life by your parents or anyone else. But let me introduce that world to you, because it's so lovely when you're feeling as though you're not on a constant battlefield. Come off the battlefield. There's no one out there to get you. There's no God out there watching your every movement, ready to pounce. From the place of preference, wouldn't it be lovely to move to the new place of newfound acceptances about yourself? Even words like that, Gemma, they're not heard, generally speaking, by the person who's even trying to do something about their addiction. It's all about the do's and the don'ts, you know. Got to stay clean. If you don't, this will happen. Make sure you go to your meeting. Make sure you don't miss a meeting. If you miss a 12-step meeting, you might turn into a pumpkin, right? It's back to fear again all the time, you know. Make sure you read you do that. You don't do that. You don't. God's sake, you know. Where's the heart about the being? Where's the really looking at the pain that's resulted in the addictioning? It's not even looked at. But the person's yearning, their being's yearning for it just to be acknowledged. And as soon as it is, there's the affirmation and validation straight away that every one of us requires in this life. It's about self and mutual respect. which is rarely, rarely, rarely ever demonstrated in the world. We're sorely lacking in the basic essentials of how to be heart, not just heart warriors, heart beings that can then become warriors for others, absolutely. But to know that we have a heart that needs to be loved. I told you earlier that my lovely wife helped me soften my heart. She did beautifully. She does to this day. I thank her greatly for it, because it had become hardened, and most of our hearts have become hardened. How do we have a hardening of heart? We're in fear. We're in fear that we could possibly get life wrong. But that we can't possibly get life wrong. We can't get life right, particularly. We're not even supposed to do that. There's no getting life right. So we definitely can't get life wrong. So forget that nonsense. We've got to change the words, change the vocabulary, change the structure. A lie told often enough becomes the truth. They're famous words from the Russian revolutionary Lenin, right? A lie told often enough becomes the truth. Guess what? Make the lie big. Make it simple. Keep saying it, and eventually they'll believe it. Adolf Hitler. Okay, does it not say it all? We're all living a lie. Yeah, we all come to believe it. And it keeps everybody just moving along the line. Well, Gemma, I know about myself, my being, and I think doing the beautiful work that you are doing, that there's so much more to life and to you and to me and to everybody that we encounter than we've been led to believe there is. So we've got to call out the lie and let the truth about our being at last take center stage. And you know what? There is then not a problem in the world. There isn't. Not a problem that we can't see, move through, and come out the other end of. There isn't. There is no such thing as a problem.
Actually, I heard a great quote the other day, something along the lines of, in the lower frequencies, let's say third dimension, there are no solutions, and in the higher awareness, there are no problems, right? So
there you go.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So where have we got to be? We got to come up higher, have we not? Higher, higher, higher. Yeah. Really, really. Ascendancy, big time. We can use whatever description we choose to use that best sums it up. But that's what we're born into this life to be. And it is there. I see it. I see it in these two little ones growing older. They've not lost any of it, courtesy of my lovely wife, Anne-Louise, myself being the great uncles. Do you think we're going to let those two little ones have any possible unnecessary, detrimental, dwarfing, kind of stifling experience unless it's absolutely beyond our assistance? Of course not. And their lovely mummy, is she going to? No, of course not. But we've had to, each of us, come to that different place of awareness in ourselves. And the people that you are speaking to through these wonderful discussions that you're having with, and I have had a little glimpse at some of the different speakers that you've had on before, and I'm now, I'm very respectful of the fact that you've invited me to be part of this. It's a wonderful thing to be doing because it requires a lot of that going on, just introducing the truth over the lie, the softness over the hard, the ease over the really terrible destructive behaviors that we've just got used to allowing. Yeah. And it has to end. Just got to pop the bubble, the imaginary bubble of, this is how life is. Well, actually, this is how life very definitely isn't, but it is how the world has been operating.
Right. Let's just focus a bit more on addiction, please, John. Seeing we've got specialist here.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so
Right, okay.
I'm interested in two scenarios. If you could run a bit of a dialogue on each. So for anyone
All
who's
right.
addicted that's watching this, I know you mentioned those steps of changing the language around words.
Yeah.
One, have you got anything else to add to that? And then I'd like you to, if say there's people watching who know someone who is addicted, and what's the best way they can help those people?
Yeah. Well, first of all, we can get very frightened by addiction. It's been put out there as something to fear. We do. And if somebody is in their state of addictioning in the family, husband to a wife, wife to a husband, parents to a child in their family, it is a very scary time where we can see how detrimental the person is exposing themselves to that whole thing. It's a worry, it's a concern. Sometimes we can overly be concerned and overreactive unnecessarily, at something that frightens us, but something long term, when people get into their addictioning, there can be a lot of what people call manipulation going on. They can be stealing. There's certainly all kinds of lying. There's deceit. There's letting people down. There's all of that stuff that goes on, of course. And it's heartbreaking to the loved one. Well, I could certainly recommend that they look at my book, Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free. And I mean that because it was written on the back of my experiences with those going through sometimes years of being in inactive addiction and realizing there's so much easier way of discovering who they're not, so that they could then begin to discover more truly who they are. So a big part of this is releasing who and what we're not. We're not our addiction. We're not our thoughts. We're not our recovery from our addiction. We're not a failure. We're not our mother. We're not our father. We're not any of those things. And the more we can keep letting those things just drop away, it leaves us with the obvious place of, well, if I'm not all of those things, I'm still here because life's still breathing me, life's still living me, then who am I without all of that stuff, right? So it's very much a lifting out, again, of things, layers that we've been trying to make sense of. That's a whole treatment program. People pay thousands and thousands of pounds to go through treatment programs. And it's all about overcoming their addiction. Well, if you keep trying to overcome an addiction, I assure you, it'll never go away. How could it? If you're always in a perpetual state of being in recovery. Nonsense description. I've asked people many a time, what is it are you in recovery from? People find it quite hard to say sometimes, right? But then maybe pluck out, well, I drink too much. Okay, right. How long is it going to take you to recover? Oh, that's a hard question. Well, it could take forever. It could take forever, right? Well, how will you ever know when you've ever recovered? Okay, they're questions I would ask. Never, ever, ever been posed to them as a possibility ever before. It's all about, you're in a place of recovery and therefore you're going to be for the rest of your life. Well, to a young person, Gemma, I tell you what, there's nothing. I don't see for a young person who's being in their active addicting, and then they have the possibility of a lifetime spent in recovery. I don't know if one is any more attractive than the other. I think they're pretty awful options to present to a person, really. So we've got to come away from that stuff, right? Bill W., the guy often attributed to being the originator of 12-step mentality and the Alcoholics Anonymous and all the other various likewise support groups, right? I think if he was here today, he would say, oh my God, surely they're not still trying to do that same thing I did nearly 100 years ago with people. Look at how much we've learned more about our spiritual being. Look at how much we know about ourselves scientifically and biologically and neurologically. And doesn't even come into it, Gemma, right? Still on that, up against it. They've done such terrible things, Then they send people off to treatment centers at whatever cost. And their hope is, right, he's there for 3 months. She's there for 3 months. Fingers crossed. Surely to God, they'll sort him out. And when he comes back, meanwhile, they're still getting on with all their same behaviors, other members of the family, drinking, using, whatever, just haven't presented themselves with the problem of it. And they expect the person to come back fixed and to go back to that same setting straight away. Are we mad? Oh, have we lost the plot completely? Well, I believe the world has, and I believe all those methods miss it completely. So, how do you ever know when you're going to be recovered? And you know what? Even that question it dawns on the individual, I think, what have I been doing to myself, right? To this day, Gemma, I would say, well, people ask me the most stupid, ridiculous question there could ever be. John, what's your success rate when you're working with people in addiction? And I say, without even having to blink an eyelid, 100%. Oh, John, that's impossible. 100%. 100. How could it be 100%? Is it? Because I can assure you, if the person is ready to simply understand what it is I'm explaining differently to their being, they will never, ever, ever, I assure every person, I can guarantee, Gemma, how could they ever go back to being the same smallness of being that they were beforehand? It's about expanding an individual's already made, knowing, conscious awareness of how much greater they are than how they've learned to become. That's all. That's it. It's beautiful in its simplicity, but like most profound truths, they're so simple, we miss the obvious. It's about love, acceptance, understanding, no judgment, no criticism, no recommendations, no adherences, no, you've got to do this, you've got to do that, and then you'll be this. No pie in the sky promises like that. Affirmation and validation. The same with the people that I encountered in HIV/AIDS. Same with the people I've seen in every walk of life, whether they've been on the street homeless or going to extremely high-paying, expensive rehab centers along with other celebrities and the likes. Same thing counts. Who are you? Who are you not? Would it be okay to let go of who you're definitely not, so you can return to the being that at last feels free to be their being? I'll show you how.
Okay.
That's it.
So you mentioned presence before and heart connection. So are you saying if we know someone who's addicted, if we can be more present with them and heart connected and compassionate and
So important.
them to be their authentic selves or to discover their authentic selves, is what going to replace their addicting?
I would say it's an enormous, enormous part of it. Enormous, because if there's that one member of the family that appears to have got things so wrong and is going through their addiction and their recovery process, as we call it, okay, and everybody's waiting on the sidelines for them to return magically, and I've often heard it say, we might be able to like them again. I don't know if we'll be able to love them again, but we might be able to like them again, So, but we're hoping that they come back fixed. Well, I assure you, there's as much work, if you like, there's as much centeredness, back to presence, that the family, also the loved one of the so-called person with the problems, can be doing on their own self, first and foremost, because it's never just about the person in addiction when they are connected to family or a loved one. How could it be? I've just said about what my life has been, how massively helped and changed has been by me being partnered in my life. Remember, I signed up to a ridiculous commitment to a life of chastity, poverty, right? Who in their right mind would do that, right? Voluntarily at 11. And the killer of it all, obedience. My God, that's what killed me, right? Obedience to what? To a controlling mechanism that thought it had all the answers for me, and it hasn't had one. And it's the same with everybody else. There are no answers out there for our being. Presence is crucial. If the family can get it together that this person struggling with those things is doing so because they've been really hurt somewhere along the line, maybe actually had a trauma that they cannot figure out for the life of them, but definitely there's been a violation of whatever kind. Maybe they've been ignored. Maybe they haven't been given enough attention. It could be small like that. Or maybe they've had something major challenging that has brought them to a place of fearful exhaustion with it. Now, somehow or other, our family, our loved ones, those that we think we count on, have got to put ourselves through a similar rising up, have we not, of our conscious awareness, of our heart, which we forget. And we rely so much on this, which does so little in comparison to this. Huge amounts of knowing in here, if we could just but listen to it, love it, and let it be. Presence. That means no judgment and no criticism, just even the magical words. I can understand what it must be like to have gone through whatever you've gone through. I can understand how you must feel. Beautiful, natural words. That's it. It's all about God. Wow, the release of that. That takes the person immediately from the place of stuckness to a place of preference to a different place of acceptance about their self. We've got it so back to front, and I can't do with back to front. It's about turning the whole of back to front the other way around and think, does this feel, and does it sound, does it taste, does it look like something at last that feels like I have more connection again with life? Because the other clearly wasn't working for me. I don't suppose it's worked particularly well for you, Gemma, in whichever way it's been in your past, your experience. And, you know, it works for no one when we're trying to do life the way it's being construed rather than the way it just is.
Lovely, great. Thank you, John. Now, I'm interested in what you said about that your beautiful wife softened your heart.
Yeah, she did.
Okay, so let's talk about the heart. And I mean, it might be for men that are in partnership easier to do this with a woman. But let's say a lot of men also haven't got that intimate connection with the divine feminine, the soft divine feminine that can soften their heart, as opposed to the wounded feminine that they have to keep their heart in that place of, you know, defense and guardedness. What have you got to say around this topic?
Yeah, you know, again, it's, well, first of all, I keep coming back to that. It's about awareness, because unless we become aware of the very, you know, words that you've spoken, those very truths that you've just laid out there, well, how can we do anything about it? It's got to come into our awareness. We've got to come to a realization different. That might become a new revelation for us, right? As a result, right? A realization becomes a revelation. A revelation can become a different way of connection again when we have lost connection. Okay? We require what we call the male and the feminine, or we might call, you know, think of the tree. The tree is a beautiful, beautiful example, is it not? That receives from what I think of as, we might call it the divine masculine, the sunlight, right? Down over, just like our source, through the chakras, all the way down, down over. We also need to receive them from what we sometimes call the feminine energy, the Mother Earth, as we sometimes call it, up over through the different chakras, if you like, and merging here at the heart. Right, they're there, they're in supply constantly for the tree, are they not? Right, through its roots, through its branches. There's the beautiful tree, hundreds and hundreds of years old. Sit at the base of a tree, let it lean against, and you know what? You can feel it. You can feel it, right? Because it's a growing, living. It doesn't have a problem, and it doesn't have a solution, and it isn't trying to live the ways of the world, though it's often obviously affected by them. It's just its being. Try it to anybody that's listening. Go and find a very beautiful big tree, take a little seat at the base of it, let it take its weight, your weight, because it will, and feel the energies coming down over and up over. We need the supply constantly. My supply, as I've said so many times in so many different ways, was cut off at 11 years old. Gemma, I might as well have been castrated, right? Okay. You know, poverty, or chastity, whatever that was supposed to mean at those times in my life, and obedience, right? Nonsense. Has my wife softened my heart? Yeah. Is she still constantly softening my heart? Yes. Am I probably softening her heart without maybe even realizing it? Yes. Why? Because we've stopped any fear, any competition between ourselves, any necessity to even argue. Do you know what? We can have a disagreement for a moment. Do you know what lasts about 2 seconds? Right? You know, I can say something now without getting a frying pan around my head, right? Because we understand each other differently, because we've discovered how to do that. To the person that isn't in partnership, okay, yeah, because, oh, wouldn't it be lovely? I speak to people all the time who would, woman crave to have a male partner, a male crave to, anybody wanting to be partnered by another partner, right? Male or female, for that matter. The partnership, the connection, the feeling of affirmation and validation, understanding. You're not getting anything wrong, right? But could you see it a different way? This is how I see it, right? Is there anything about how I see it that could actually help you to see it, even if you understand me a little bit differently, because of the fact that you've actually given yourself the permission to do that? You know, it's about learning, discovering stages, right? I've now been married nearly 30 years, right? That's like 3 times the length of time I gave her to what I've spent most of this time talking about being a Catholic priest, right? So it's trebled. I hope we have another 30 years together. Wouldn't it be awesome? But you know what? Even when it comes to, you know, my wife going off into the next plane and me going off to the next plane, well, we already talk about it. We already say, well, guess what? We'll surely still be together because we've always been drawn together. And we should have seen that from the get-go. One of the things about Anne Louise, just to maybe complete and to finish off, she happened, long before she became my wife, actually, but she happened to be a guest at my ordination to the priesthood, right? She was just among a friend of mine. She tells me to this day, Gemma, that what she witnessed that day was definitely not what I thought I was being prepared for and experiencing. There's a part of the ordination ritual where the bishop and then all the fellow priests all come and they do a laying on of hands onto my head, right? A conferring of the Holy Spirit. And it all say, oh, wow, everybody thinks it looks so holy and dignified and precious. And I went there, you know, thinking, yeah, this is it. This is the moment. This is the moment, right? Anne Louise tells me that to her view of that, to this day, she saw that as the exact opposite. She saw that as what she calls the day the music. Remember, I was a fine musician, loved music, played the guitar all the time, well known for it, wrote beautiful music. She saw that as the day the music died. As every set of hands were laid on my head. And you know what? I think she has it so right. Not only did the day the music die, because my guitar set stood collecting dust for years. It doesn't now, thanks to Anne Louise. I play my music again, right? But it did. It was an actual fact, not a conferring of the Holy Spirit down, or you know, from out over or whatever. It was a closing down of my spirit. And she witnessed it. when we see in another, or when we desire in another, the partnership, male and female, all we're longing for is the spirit that's already within us, to be greeted by the spirit in another, united as the heart and soul of what our being truly is. And when it happens, we'll know it, and there'll be no necessity for fear, because we'll know we can't get anything wrong, and there's nothing to particularly get right. There's just, I'm safe and I'm okay. What a beautiful way to go through life. So if you can be partnered by the divine feminine, if you're the divine masculine, and if you don't even think of yourself as divine anything, right? If you're male and if you're female, and you know you want to be partnered, that in truth is the divine. And we are all individuations of the divine. We're all a microcosm of the macrocosm. And as soon as we get that, everything changes, Gemma. Everything changes. How do we get to that point? We simply allow it to become, known and experienced and felt. And if anybody's listening to this, maybe they are feeling it already, and maybe re-listen to it if you didn't quite get it all, because it will be the invitation that life's always making to every one of us to know that we can do life differently if we just let it in. The permission. No conferring, no laying on of hands, no anything from the outside in, no what can't and can't be done, no belonging to anything before you've made it in life. No. We're made, and we're here, and we're present, and we've got to make that presence felt. And we're equipped with everything we need to do that. But we've either forgotten to remember it, or we were never shown it in the first place. That's all we have to do. It's a remembering process, not a learning process. Remembering the truth over the lie. The truth was there, the lie took over. The lie has to make way, the truth comes in. The partner comes with it. The life comes with that. The freedom over the fear, the life over the death.
Wonderful.
That's it.
Thank you, John. Now, we've got probably about, well, we can go a bit over, so as much time as you need.
I'm all right.
To make sure
I'm here, I'm present.
Thank you. To make sure nothing important that you can, contribute within this sort of short time frame, what else needs to be said in this conversation around men, masculinity, the healing journey?
Yeah. You know what, men, guys, you're doing fine. You're doing fine. You're doing absolutely fine, considering what doing fine has been for you. And if doing fine is managing to pick yourself through this strange world and all its requirements and all its nonsense, because it doesn't make sense. The world does not make sense, right? And the one thing lacking in this world is common sense, right? Trouble with common sense, not very common. Okay. So, men, I would say this very simply to you. Step outside, wherever you are, and have a word with yourself, right? Have a word with yourself. What is it that's been keeping me from realizing the simplicity, the truth, and the profoundness of my being? What is it? What is it that John Flaherty, out of nowhere, by courtesy of Gemma Starr on Heart Warriors, was talking about today, that I did hear, that did resonate with me, and that seemingly is still for everybody else other than for me? What is it? What could that be? Step outside, have a little word with yourself. There's nothing really, when you have a little word with yourself, that you'll be able to come up with as a good enough reason to stay in your smallness. Okay. You don't have to be like the many, many men, all very clownish looking as far as I can see. I don't know how they are in Australia, but here they are in the UK. Every man's trying to look like the same as another man. I don't know why they're doing that. Or shaving heads most of the time. Everybody wants to look bald, even if they're not bald, or whatever age they are. They present themselves in a particular fashion, right? Well, you can do that if you wish to do that, but you don't have to do that. You don't have to be anything. You don't have to do anything. You have a job, you don't have a job. What's a job? J-O-B, it's a jump out of bed, right? It's okay. You either do it because you want to do it and it's fulfilling, or you do it because you think you have to, because you got to make ends meet. But you know what? Whatever we do or whatever we don't do, we've got to know who we are. And then we definitely get to know who we are by knowing who we're not. Step outside, guys. Have a little word with yourself. Listen to your heart. Tune in and just simply ask yourself, what is it that's prevented me from forgetting to remember the truth of me? What is it? And would it be okay for me just to do it a different way? I'd take the risk, even if I think it's a bit of a scary risk. Step outside the lines, just like George Carlin with his coloring book and his crayons, right? Don't be afraid to go over that. In fact, enjoy going over the lines if you want, as messy as you like, right? We can't make a mistake. There's no such thing as making a mistake. Think of the word, a mistake, right? You did life one way, right? It was a mistake, just like they do in the movies, right? Take one, action, all right. Take 22, okay. Have another go at it, right? Have fun, right? Realize how ridiculous you've been, if you like. What you signed up to do, what you promised. Promises are hideous things to make to anybody or anything. How can we live up to a promise? Who we're promising? Who do we want to appease, right? Was it your mother? If it was, fatal, right? Fatal. Mother and son relationships, they're always disastrous, right? Always.
Two boys.
Okay. But they are. But you know why? Because the mother's constantly looking for something that the son's, she wants the son to become. But guess what? As they want you to appease their mother, they love their mother, but they've got to go beyond. We all have to go beyond our parents, do we not? Right? Love for your parents and go beyond them, right? That's a creation. We're creators. Now we can either create mayhem in our life, or we can create magnificence, but we cannot not create. Get creating, right? Make a choice. Go outside of the lines, I suggest, and make a mess if you need to. Or maybe you might think outside the lines, make it much nicer than staying inside the lines. Step outside, have a little word with yourself, and go and test it out. Have some fun. And it doesn't mean that you have to be on self-destruct to do it, or think that you need to be in isolation because nobody understands you, or because you think that you can be partnered or not partnered because you've kind of left it too late, or there's nobody quite right for you there. Tell you what, there's everybody out there ready for you. There's everything ready for you. They're ready for you when you're ready for yourself. Go into yourself. Go into yourself. Relax. Breathe. Realize that was me then, and it's taken a long time. Now, just like the 3-year-old, now let's pretend. Let's go for it.
So good. So good. Thank you, John.
All right, Chairman. Okay. We've just got to have, do you know, if we're not laughing a lot, and I stop laughing, just like the music stopped in me, we've got to laugh. We've got to laugh. We've got to laugh at ourselves and our stupidest things we've got into the ways of, and then just let them drop away.
Yeah, and this conversation has helped me a lot too, and I'll definitely re-listen, because I was one of those children who were very shut down, and then even I had a 10-year abusive marriage that I was very shut down in as well, and it's taken me really till the last 6 years when I started writing to actually come into my authenticity.
Beautiful, Gemma. Yes. So yeah, and when you have had those, because we all do in some form or other, we have very challenging and testing experiences. We're pretty unevolved beings if you think about it. There are only 3 little areas that we can really be challenged by as human beings. Health can be one of them, finance, or relationships. And they're the 3 things for the human to manage, and we still tend to make a mess of each of them, right? Okay. We are pretty unevolved in that, we could say, right, at this point in time. But if you think about it, they all affect each other, do they not? So if we're having difficulty with our relationships, inevitably there's going to be worry about finance too, and vice versa. If we're having worry about finance, we are also going to probably make ourselves very poorly, very sick, okay? So health, relationships, and finance. We need to put our attention on those things, not fear them. Look after our health, our well-being, remembering. Stay in that higher vibration once we've remembered it. Look to the relationships and actually really seriously question, are they relationships that are helping me to expand, or are they keeping me dwarfed? Is there any love at all about that? Or is it abject fear, in which case it's a no-go, because that's not lifing you, that's punishment and harm and keeping you dwarfed. So we leave the relationship because there's no elation left in that relationship, right? And we seek an elation of a different kind. How can we do that? Because we're creators. We can either create magnificence and freedom and health and financial whatever, which is just money in, money out, breath in, breath out, next experience in, next experience out. You know, we make too much of any of these things, really, don't we? Because life supports us as we go through the different stages of creativity. So one thing religions definitely do get right: we're made in the image and the likeness of the creator, right? Okay, you might have heard that one before. Lots of people have. There is a truth in that. We're in such the likeness, in other words, that we cannot be separated from. That's what we've forgotten to remember. We're creators. Make sure you're creating from the place of presence, freedom, and knowing.
So
and
good.
enjoy the ride. Enjoy the ride.
Amazing. Thank you, John. So just let people know again the names of your books, and we'll drop them in the description below. And
Okay.
where can people find you?
Yeah, my books are, it's kind of amazing really about these two books. You know, they have hardly any marketing or promotion. They are on Amazon, and a lot of people don't like to buy from Amazon from lots of different reasons. So you can get them from there, from Amazon. Addiction Unplugged, How to Be Free. There's the little book there, the image of it there. And easy to read, deliberately written, so that's very easy to read. It's marked as a book actually for all those affected by their own addictions or the addictions of others, right? So it's more likely that it's those affected by the addictions of others that will actually even read such the book if the person's in such the place of addiction that they're not at that point. But not always is the case. So Amazon can be my own website, which you can pop on, you know, your link if you wish to do that, Gemma, is another way. But, you know, within no time, this book, Addiction Unplugged, quite miraculously, really, on the spiritual airways, it has to be said, suddenly became translated and is now available in German, Romanian, Polish, and Spanish, as well as English. I mean, quite amazing. On the back of that book came Guilt Unplugged, and what we are describing this particular YouTube with yourself, Gemma, of Heart Warriors, waking up from the lie we live. And I would suggest that in actual fact, even if you never feel as though you've had an addiction of any kind in your life, we all actually have. We've all found something to be latched onto, really, that we feel stuck about, even if it's just being right about things all of the time, right? That can be an addictive behavior. We'll find that this book, Guilt Unplugged, probably follows on even more easily to read after the other one. But, you know, there we go. So Amazon's the obvious place. Any kind of bookstore will certainly order them in for you, or you can go to the website.
So good, John. Okay. Any short final words? A message from
Oh, wow. Have I got any left? I wonder. Do you know what? Okay, very quickly, very, very succinctly, which I truly believe is helpful, practically helpful to people. 4 things to remember, should we ever forget to remember them, right? Okay. Number 1, I am and never can I be separated from my source. Right? Number 2, remembrance. Should we ever forget to remember it? And often we will. I am who I say that I am. Right? Our own declaration from our own heart about our own presence, about our own being. Nobody can take that away from you. It's your experience, therefore it's your truth. Go and create it and be it. One we've mentioned already, I cannot not create. Be very careful what it is we choose to create. And finally, the 4th remembrance, should we ever forget to remember it, which often we will, the meaning of life is the meaning I give to it. Because there is no other meaning out there already defined, right? Only the world comes up with those kinds of fantasies created by the mind, okay? But the meaning of life is the meaning I give to it. Choose well.
So true. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, John. It's been an amazing episode. I absolutely loved it.
Great, Emma. Me too, actually. Been lovely. You know, as I speak to you or to another, those things, do you not think at the same time it's really reinforcing and resonating for me a truth about me? So it's been an absolute pleasure for me too.
Oh,
thank you.
Very welcome. Everyone, thank you for watching. If you could like, subscribe and share this message of John's, it'd be great. And I will see you in a couple of days with another episode of Heart Warriors. Bye.